In all my years walking these hospital corridors, I've learned that the most heartbreaking stories rarely begin with a scream or a siren. No, they start quietly, sometimes with a gentle smile, a reassuring word, or a family that insists again and again that everything is just fine. I've seen it too many times to count, but there was one morning that still haunts me. A morning when I trusted those words and opened a door expecting nothing but the usual. What I found inside changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. It was early, the kind of gray dawn that seeps into your bones and makes the world feel a little heavier. I remember the way the light filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows on the linoleum floor. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and old coffee, the familiar soundtrack of beeping monitors and distant footsteps echoing down the hall. I'd already checked on a dozen patients, each with their own small dramas, aches and fevers, worried eyes, hands reaching for comfort. But when I reached his room, I paused. His family had called the night before, their voices calm and polite, assuring us that he was doing well, that he just needed a routine check. They said he was eating, talking, laughing even. I wanted to believe them. After so many years, you learn to read between the lines, but sometimes hope gets the better of you. I knocked softly, waiting for an answer that never came. The silence on the other side of that door was different, too still, too complete. I pushed it open, expecting to see him sitting up in bed, maybe watching television or dozing with the morning news murmuring in the background. Instead, what greeted me was a chill that seemed to settle deep in my chest. The room was dim, curtains drawn tight, and the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. He was there all right, but not as I'd hoped. The truth of his condition was written in every line of his face, every shallow breath, every tremor in his hands. He was alone, so terribly alone, and the pain in his eyes was something I'll never forget. I remember standing there, frozen for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I'd seen suffering before, God knows I have, but there was something about this, about the way his family's reassurances had masked the reality that struck me to my core. I wanted to be angry, to blame someone for leaving him like this, but all I felt was sorrow. Sorrow for him, for his family, for all the times we tell ourselves that everything is fine because the truth is too hard to face. My name is Joyce, and after 50 years of nursing, I thought I'd built up walls strong enough to keep the heartbreak at bay. But that morning, behind that door, those walls crumbled. I learned that sometimes the greatest pain isn't in the wounds we can see, but in the silence we keep, the truths we hide, and the love we're too afraid to show. And I carry that lesson with me every single day. That morning, as I made my way through the maze of the hospital, I remember feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders, not just from lack of sleep or aching feet, but from the years I'd spent watching life and death dance so close together in these pale-lit rooms. The nurse's station was already humming with quiet urgency, papers shuffling, phones ringing in that tired, persistent way, and the aroma of burnt coffee lingered. Someone had forgotten about the pot again, just like every other day. You learn to find comfort in those small, familiar things. The soft click of shoes on polished floors, the gentle laughter of nurses sharing stories from the night before, the way sunlight tries to sneak in through those narrow hospital windows. Even after all these years, those little rituals are what keep us grounded, reminding us that we're still human, even when the world outside feels so far away. I stopped to catch up with Helen, who was finishing her night shift. Her eyes were rimmed red, but she managed to smile, talking about her granddaughter's birthday coming up, little Olivia, always full of questions, always asking about Grandma's adventures at the hospital. Those moments, that's what keeps us going. The hospital isn't just a place of pain, it's a place of life, of memories stitched together by people who care too much, even when it hurts. There's a quiet camaraderie among nurses, a bond forged in the fires of long nights and impossible choices. We lean on each other, share a knowing glance when words fail, and sometimes, when the weight gets too heavy, we find a quiet corner to let the tears fall where no one can see. As the sun climbed higher, though you'd hardly notice in that building, I moved from room to room, checking on patients I'd come to know like old friends. There was Mr. Albert with his crossword puzzles, always asking for a pen. Dorothy, who never let me leave without a story from my own childhood, and Mary, her hands frail but her smile bright as she waited for her son's daily phone call. Each room held its own world, filled with hope, fear, and the quiet courage of people facing the unknown. I always try to take a moment to sit with them, even if it's just for a minute, to listen to their stories, to hold a hand, to remind them they're not alone. Sometimes that's all we can offer, a little bit of our time, a little bit of our heart. But as I approached his room, something in my gut twisted. Maybe it was the way the hall seemed quieter there, or maybe it was just the memory of his family's reassurances echoing in my mind. I had seen families like his before, loving, devoted, but so desperate to believe that things were as they should be. Sometimes I think people tell us what they wish was true, not what really is. It's a way of protecting themselves, and maybe the patient too, from the full weight of reality. I've learned to listen carefully, to the words and to the silences in between. There's a certain look in a family member's eyes, a tremor in their voice, that tells you more than any chart ever could. I remember pausing outside his door, my hand hovering over the handle, my heart beating with a strange mixture of dread and hope. You'd think after all these years I'd be immune to those feelings, but I never am. Every patient is someone's father, someone's brother, someone's whole world. And every time I step into a room, I know I'm stepping into a story that's bigger than any chart or diagnosis can tell. I took a breath, steadied myself, and prepared to face whatever I might find. That's what we do, isn't it? We walk into the unknown, hearts open, ready to help, no matter how heavy the burden might be. And in those quiet moments before the door opens, I always whisper a little prayer, not just for the patient, but for myself, that I'll have the strength to do what needs to be done and the compassion to do it with love. There's a certain quiet that settles over a hospital in the late morning, after the chaos of shift change, but before the visitors start drifting in. That's when you see the truth of the place, the way the light falls in thin stripes across worn tile, the soft rhythm of nurses' shoes, the gentle clatter of medication carts. I like to take a moment then, just to breathe, to steady myself for whatever the day might bring. You'd be surprised how much humanity happens in those in-between moments, when the world outside seems to pause and all that matters is what's right in front of you. I always try to make my rounds slowly, not just rushing from room to room, but taking time to notice each patient, every detail that might reveal something another missed. That's the only way you survive so many years in this job. You don't just treat symptoms, you listen to hearts. On that particular day, the hospital had a strange hush. Even the nurses' banter at the station seemed quieter, more thoughtful. Maybe it was the weather, or maybe it was just one of those days when you know deep down a storm is coming. I passed by Mr. Albert, who waved me in for a quick chat about his crossword. He insisted the answer was Horizon, and I didn't have the heart to disagree. Dorothy asked me for a story about my own children, and I told her about the time my son Paul tried to build a raft out of soda bottles and nearly floated away down the creek. Her laughter was soft, but her eyes shone bright. These small exchanges, they're the lifeblood of what we do. Little reminders that behind every illness, there's a person hungry for connection. I remember noticing the absence of a certain energy outside his room. Sometimes you feel it before you see it, a heaviness that hangs in the air, a stillness that feels out of place in a hospital full of life and movement. His door was shut, and there was no sound from inside, not even the faint hum of a television. I couldn't help but remember the soft insistence of his family's voices on the phone, their careful choice of words. They wanted so badly to believe that things would be okay, that he was strong, that he didn't need more than a smile and a little encouragement. I've heard that kind of hope before, and I've learned not to judge it. Sometimes hope is all a family has left, and sometimes it's easier to wrap yourself in hope than to face the truth of a loved one's suffering. As I stood there in the hallway, I tried to remember the man he had been before, always quick with a joke, always asking after the nurses' families, never complaining no matter how rough the treatments got. People like him, they become part of you. You carry them with you, long after your shift ends, long after they're gone. That morning, I found myself wishing I could protect him from whatever waited inside that room, just as I wished I could protect his family from the pain of knowing the truth. But wishing doesn't change reality. I paused, my hand on the door, and let myself feel the weight of the years behind me, the patients I'd lost, the ones I'd saved, the ones I'd simply sat with through the long, dark nights. It's easy to forget, in the rush of tasks and the endless list of things to do, that each life you touch leaves a mark on your own. That's why I walk these halls with my eyes open and my heart even more so, searching for the small signs, the hidden hurts, the words left unspoken. It's in those details that you find the real story, the one people are sometimes too afraid to tell. Before I opened the door, I closed my eyes for just a second and whispered a quiet promise to myself that I would truly see him, not just as a patient, but as a man with a lifetime behind him and a family struggling to hold on. And as I finally turned the handle and stepped inside, I thought of all the people out there listening to stories like mine, each carrying their own burdens, their own memories of rooms where truths waited to be found. If you're hearing my words now, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? What stories do you carry quietly in your own heart? Please share with me. Sometimes just knowing we're not alone in our feelings makes all the difference. There are moments in this profession when the world seems to stop spinning, when every sound fades, and all you can hear is the thumping of your own heart. That's how it was as I finally turned the handle to his room, the familiar, cool metal pressing against my palm, a small detail, but one that stayed with me. The door opened with a soft creak, the kind that always makes me think of secrets, of things left unsaid. I stepped inside and for a moment just stood there, letting my eyes adjust to the gloom. The curtains were drawn tight, barely a thread of light slipping through, and the air felt thick, as if it hadn't moved all night. I could smell the faint trace of aftershave and the unmistakable chemical tang of antiseptics, but underneath it all was something else, a sadness that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. He lay in the bed, still and small, swallowed up by white sheets that seemed far too big for his frame. I'd seen him strong before, the kind of man who always greeted me with a smile, who remembered my name even when the pain was at its worst. Now his face looked drawn, his eyes half open, searching for something I couldn't see. I could feel the loneliness in the room, and it broke my heart. His family's words echoed in my mind. He's just tired, he's eating well, he's fine. But I knew in that instant that none of it was true. There was no plate on the bedside table, no cup of untouched coffee, no flowers or cards. Just a silence so heavy it was almost suffocating. I moved closer, careful not to startle him, and saw the tremor in his hand as he reached out, fingers curling weakly toward mine. That small gesture brought tears to my eyes. I took his hand, feeling how cold it was, how fragile. He tried to speak, but his voice was little more than a whisper, words tumbling out in fragments. He told me he hadn't seen his family in days, that he missed the sound of laughter, the comfort of a familiar face. He wanted to know if he was going to be okay, if someone would stay with him. I squeezed his hand and told him I was there, that I wouldn't leave him alone. In that moment, the weight of his isolation pressed down on me, heavier than any physical wound I'd ever tended. There are times when you can't fix what's wrong, when all the training and experience in the world means so little. You can only bear witness, offer what comfort you can, and hope it's enough. I listened as he spoke about his life, old memories that came in fits and starts, stories of fishing trips with his brother, of holidays spent around a crowded table, of a childhood dog named Max. His eyes would close for a moment, then flutter open, searching my face for reassurance. I saw the fear flicker there, the worry that he'd been forgotten. My heart ached for him, for the family who, for reasons I couldn't know, had chosen distance over presence. I checked his vitals, saw the numbers dropping lower than they should be, the oxygen monitor beeping quietly in the background. I called for assistance, my voice steady but my hands trembling just enough to betray what I was feeling inside. The team came, Helen, Mark, even young Jessica, who always tried to hide her nerves behind a smile. We worked together in that dim, silent room, doing what we could to ease his pain, to make him comfortable, to show him he wasn't alone. That's all you can do sometimes. Show up, hold a hand, whisper that someone cares. There's a dignity in that, a sacredness I've only found in the hardest moments of this work. As the hours slipped by, I watched the struggle in his breathing, the way his eyes darted to the door every time footsteps passed in the hallway, hoping, always hoping, that maybe someone from his family would come. I wanted to promise him that they would, but I couldn't lie. I just sat with him, telling little stories, humming old songs, letting him know that, at least for now, he was seen and heard. I left the door cracked open, hoping that someone, anyone, might walk through before it was too late. That day, I learned again how quickly things can change, how a life can shift from promise to heartbreak in the space of a single morning. And I felt the burden of all the things left unsaid, the visits not made, the love that sometimes stays locked behind closed doors. Looking back, I wonder what might have been different if only someone had truly listened, had truly seen what was happening, not just outside the room, but within those four quiet walls. If you've never watched someone fade away in front of you, it's hard to explain the ache it leaves behind. That day, as I sat by his bed, the minutes stretched into hours, and the sense of helplessness pressed in from every side. I kept telling myself to be strong, to be the calm in the storm. But the truth is, even after all these years, there are moments that shake you to your core. His breaths grew shallow, each one a fragile promise that the next might not come. The monitor's beeping was steady, but underneath it, I could hear the sound of my own heart breaking for him. He tried to talk, but his voice was only a thread. I leaned in, holding his cold hand between both of mine, feeling the thinness of his skin, the way his fingers barely gripped mine back. I remember his eyes so vividly, wide, searching, desperate for something I couldn't give. He asked me if I'd seen his son, if maybe today was the day his family would visit. I told him I'd pass along the message, even if I knew the chances were slim. In the quiet that followed, he spoke of regrets, of wishes unfulfilled, of the comfort of his wife's hand that he missed more than anything. He tried to smile, but it broke halfway, trembling into tears he was too tired to wipe away. I wanted to be angry at his family, to shout or call or do something to make them come. But the truth is, I've learned that everyone carries their own burdens, their own reasons for distance. Some people don't know how to face the pain of watching someone slip away. Others run because the memories are too much. I've seen it so many times. Good people, loving people, who just can't bear the weight of goodbye. Still, it doesn't make it any easier when you're the one left behind to witness the loneliness. The team came and went, each doing their best to make him comfortable. Helen adjusted his pillows, Mark checked the IV, Jessica whispered gentle words as she brushed his hair from his forehead. We all felt the heaviness in that room, the way sorrow can settle in your bones. But we pressed on, because that's what nurses do. We show up, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. There's a kind of sacred duty in being present for someone's final days, a responsibility that's both humbling and heartbreaking. The hardest part came later that afternoon. His breathing became ragged, and I saw the fear in his eyes, fear not just of dying, but of dying alone. I sat closer, humming a lullaby my own mother used to sing to me. I told him stories, even silly ones, about childhood and summer rains and the way the world looks after a storm. I told him about the first time I held my son and how love, real love, never leaves you, even when the person is gone. In those moments, I tried to give him some measure of peace, a feeling that someone in the world still cared, still saw him, still held him as precious. In the middle of all that, I couldn't help but think about my own losses, friends and family who'd slipped away, the goodbyes I never got to say, the forgiveness I never asked for. I thought about how easy it is to take for granted that we'll have another chance, another visit, another day. Life has a way of closing doors before we're ready. There were times during those long hours when I had to step out into the hallway just to catch my breath, to blink back the tears that threatened to spell. I'd look out the window at the world going on outside, people walking, laughing, living their lives, and it felt so far removed from the quiet suffering inside those walls. Sometimes I'd see family members in the waiting room, nerves stretched tight, faces drawn with worry and love, and I'd wish more than anything that someone would come for him. But the hours passed and no one came. As sunset crept into the room, painting everything in a golden glow, I realized that all I could do was be there, fully, honestly, with my whole heart. I squeezed his hand, whispered that he wasn't alone, and promised to stay until the very end. That's the hardest promise of all, but it's the one that matters most. If you've ever sat with someone through the darkness, if you've ever carried the weight of another person's pain, I hope you know you gave them a gift more precious than anything else. Please, if this story touches something in you, consider subscribing or sharing your own story below. We're all in this together, and the world needs more kindness now more than ever. As the sky outside began to shift from late afternoon into the soft hues of evening, I felt the heaviness in the room deepen, almost as if the sorrow itself had settled over us like a blanket. I pulled my chair closer to his bed, the metal legs scraping quietly against the floor, and I leaned in, determined to be a steady presence for him. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from running around or lifting patients, but from holding space for someone else's pain, and that day I felt it in every part of me. His breathing was shallow and uneven, his eyes flickered open and closed, and I could sense he was drifting toward that place between this world and the next. We nurses, we try so hard to keep a brave face for our patients and for each other, but inside, even the strongest of us can be undone by the sight of someone facing the end alone. I remember smoothing his blanket, tucking it gently around his shoulders, and brushing his forehead with the back of my hand, just as I used to do for my own children when they were sick. He squeezed my fingers, barely a pressure at all, but it was enough to tell me he knew someone was there. He asked again if I thought his son would come. I told him I hoped so, and for a moment I let myself believe it too. Outside the room, the hospital was alive with the usual sounds, voices over the intercom, nurses laughing in the break room, someone wheeling a cart of fresh linens down the hallway. But in that small room, everything had slowed to a hush. Jessica peeked in once, her face drawn with worry, and Helen brought me a cup of tea, setting it silently on the windsail. The team, my second family, did what they could with gentle hands and kind words, but there are wounds no medicine can heal. I watched the sun trace patterns on the wall, watched the shadows lengthen, and wondered how many other rooms in the world held the same quiet ache. At one point, he turned his head and asked me if I believed in heaven. His voice was fragile, as if the words themselves might break apart before reaching me. I told him I believed in love, in connections that don't disappear, even when people do. I told him about my own father's passing, how I still felt him near me on the hardest nights, and how sometimes, when the wind rustles through the trees outside my kitchen window, I imagine it's him saying hello. He smiled just a little, and I saw some peace settle in his eyes. It's not about having the right answers, but about offering comfort in whatever way you can. The hours slipped by, each one heavier than the last. The beeping of the monitor grew fainter, and I knew we were running out of time. I sang softly, an old hymn my mother used to hum while she worked in the garden, hoping the melody would be a gentle bridge for him as he crossed over. I told him stories about my grandchildren, about the nurses who'd become my sisters, about the small joys that make life worth living. Sometimes all we have to give is our presence, our willingness to witness, to remember, to care. And then, as the sun finally slipped below the horizon, he took one last breath, so quiet I almost missed it. I felt a sadness, deep and familiar, but also a sense of relief that his suffering was over. I sat with him for a long time, holding his hand, letting the silence settle. There's no rush after a soul leaves. We owe each person a gentle farewell. I whispered a prayer for him and for his family wherever they were, wishing them peace and forgiveness. In those moments, I realized how much this work changes you. It teaches you to cherish every connection, to forgive quickly, to say the things that need saying while you still can. If you've ever walked through something like this, if you've been the one to hold someone's hand at the end, or if you've lost someone and wished you'd had more time, know that you are not alone in your grief or your love. I hope you'll take a moment to subscribe or to share your own story in the comments. We are stronger when we hold each other up, even across the miles and years that separate us. After he was gone, I sat in the quiet of that dim room, holding his hand for a while longer, not ready to let go of the warmth that lingered in my palm. There's a hush that falls after a soul slips away, a hush that's different from any other kind of silence. It's not just the absence of breath or the stillness of a body. It's the echo of all the words left unsaid, all the embraces that never came, all the forgiveness that never found its way through the years. I took a long breath, feeling the ache settle in my bones, and then I did what I always do after a loss. I straightened the sheets, smoothed his hair, and whispered a quiet blessing over him, hoping that somewhere, somehow, it would reach the ones who loved him, even if they couldn't be there at the end. The hospital outside his door moved forward as it always does, with its clattering carts and shuffling feet and the endless cycle of arrivals and departures. Helen found me in the hallway, her eyes soft with understanding, and handed me a fresh cup of tea. I sipped slowly, letting the warmth fill the emptiness. We talked for a moment, not about what had happened, but about the little things, the weather, the crocuses blooming by the front entrance, Helen's granddaughter Olivia and her plans for a school play. Those simple moments are what pull you back from the edge, remind you that life keeps moving, no matter how heavy the loss. Before going back to my other patients, I made sure to call his family. My voice was gentle as I shared the news, and I listened as tears and apologies flowed through the phone. There's no blame in my heart, only a deep, aching hope that one day they'll find peace with the choices they made and remember the good times more than the regrets. I told them about his last words, about the stories he shared, about the love he still held for them, even in his loneliness. Sometimes that's all any of us can do: offer comfort, offer truth, offer the chance for healing to begin. Afterwards, I took a walk outside the hospital, letting the evening air cool the sadness in my chest. The world outside was so alive, birds singing, children laughing in the distance, the scent of fresh-cut grass and wood smoke drifting through the air. I stood for a while in the fading light, thinking about the countless people I've cared for over the years, the burdens I've carried home in the quiet hours of the night. I remembered the lesson I learned long ago, that sorrow and beauty are never far apart, and sometimes the only way to honor a loss is to keep loving, keep caring, keep showing up for the next person who needs you. There is a peace that comes after the storm, not because the pain disappears, but because you learn to live alongside it. Sitting there under the evening sky, I thought about how each goodbye makes us softer, more aware of the preciousness of every moment. I said another quiet prayer for him, for his family, and for everyone who's ever sat in a room and wished for just one more day, one more hug, one more chance to say, "I love you." We nurses, we learn to move forward, to carry these memories like stones in our pockets, heavy but grounding us in what matters most. And as I headed back into the hospital, ready to face the next night and the next patient, I felt a gentle strength within me. The world is full of heartbreak, yes, but it's also full of people who care, who stand by each other in the hardest hours. That's the greatest comfort I know, and it's what keeps me coming back, day after day, year after year. There's something almost sacred in the way we honor those who have gone, in the way we hold space for their memory, and in the way we keep showing up for the living. Every loss leaves a mark, but it also leaves behind a lesson, a reminder to cherish, to forgive, to love fiercely while we still can. After he was gone, I sat in the quiet of that dim room, holding his hand for a while longer, not ready to let go of the warmth that lingered in my palm. There's a hush that falls after a soul slips away, a hush that's different from any other kind of silence. It's not just the absence of breath or the stillness of a body. It's the echo of all the words left unsaid, all the embraces that never came, all the forgiveness that never found its way through the years. I took a long breath, feeling the ache settle in my bones. And then I did what I always do after a loss. I straightened the sheets, smoothed his hair, and whispered a quiet blessing over him, hoping that somewhere, somehow, it would reach the ones who loved him, even if they couldn't be there at the end. The hospital outside his door moved forward as it always does, with its clattering carts and shuffling feet and the endless cycle of arrivals and departures. Helen found me in the hallway, her eyes soft with understanding, and handed me a fresh cup of tea. I sipped slowly, letting the warmth fill the emptiness. We talked for a moment, not about what had happened, but about the little things, the weather, the crocuses blooming by the front entrance, Helen's granddaughter Olivia and her plans for a school play. Those simple moments are what pull you back from the edge, remind you that life keeps moving, no matter how heavy the loss. Before going back to my other patients, I made sure to call his family. My voice was gentle as I shared the news, and I listened as tears and apologies flowed through the phone. There's no blame in my heart, only a deep, aching hope that one day they'll find peace with the choices they made and remember the good times more than the regrets. I told them about his last words, about the stories he shared, about the love he still held for them, even in his loneliness. Sometimes that's all any of us can do: offer comfort, offer truth, offer the chance for healing to begin. Afterwards, I took a walk outside the hospital, letting the evening air cool the sadness in my chest. The world outside was so alive, birds singing, children laughing in the distance, the scent of fresh-cut grass and wood smoke drifting through the air. I stood for a while in the fading light, thinking about the countless people I've cared for over the years, the burdens I've carried home in the quiet hours of the night. I remembered the lesson I learned long ago, that sorrow and beauty are never far apart, and sometimes the only way to honor a loss is to keep loving, keep caring, keep showing up for the next person who needs you. There is a peace that comes after the storm, not because the pain disappears, but because you learn to live alongside it. Sitting there under the evening sky, I thought about how each goodbye makes us softer, more aware of the preciousness of every moment. I said another quiet prayer for him, for his family, and for everyone who's ever sat in a room and wished for just one more day, one more hug, one more chance to say, I love you. We nurses, we learn to move forward, to carry these memories like stones in our pockets, heavy but grounding us in what matters most. And as I headed back into the hospital, ready to face the next night and the next patient, I felt a gentle strength within me. The world is full of heartbreak, yes, but it's also full of people who care, who stand by each other in the hardest hours. That's the greatest comfort I know, and it's what keeps me coming back day after day, year after year. There's something almost sacred in the way we honor those who have gone, in the way we hold space for their memory, and in the way we keep showing up for the living. Every loss leaves a mark, but it also leaves behind a lesson, a reminder to cherish, to forgive, to love fiercely while we still can. And that's how it happened. His family said everything was fine, but what I found behind that door was a truth I'll never forget. I carry his story and so many others inside me always. If you take anything from my words, let it be this. Don't wait to say the things that matter. Don't let fear or busyness or pride keep you from reaching out. Life is brief. Heartbreak is real. But love, real love, outlasts even the heaviest sorrow. And as long as I have breath, I'll keep showing up, keep caring, and keep believing in the power of kindness to heal even the deepest wounds.